Samantha woke up before sunrise, just like she did every day, but this morning felt different. A mix of nerves and excitement fluttered in her chest. Today was the day of her big interview. She was aiming for a secretary position at one of the city's most prestigious firms, a job that could completely transform her life. At 24, Samantha had already weathered her fair share of challenges, carving her path with grit and determination. Her adoptive mother, Linda, had always been her biggest cheerleader, pushing her to chase her dreams no matter the obstacles. As Samantha got dressed, she felt an unusual urge. She wanted something to give her an extra boost of confidence. Digging through her closet, she stumbled upon an old wooden jewelry box tucked behind a pile of forgotten clothes. It was Linda's treasure chest of keepsakes, filled with faded photographs and relics from the past. Nestled among them was a delicate gold necklace with an amethyst pendant. Samantha had admired it countless times but never dared to wear it, until now. It felt like the perfect lucky charm for such an important day. Standing in front of the towering glass facade of Bennett & Company, Samantha felt a wave of intimidation. The sleek, modern design of the building exuded power and sophistication. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the doors, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she walked through the pristine lobby. The receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile and directed her to the waiting area for her interview. When her name was finally called, Samantha entered a spacious office where Robert Bennett, the company's CEO, was seated behind a large mahogany desk. He was an imposing figure, his silver-streaked hair perfectly groomed, sharp eyes scanning her with the precision of someone who missed nothing. Samantha steadied her nerves, greeted him with a warm smile, and introduced herself confidently. But as soon as Robert's gaze landed on the necklace around her neck, his demeanor shifted. His expression froze, eyes widening slightly as if he'd seen a ghost. The room grew tense, the silence stretching uncomfortably long. Samantha instinctively reached up to adjust the necklace, wondering if it was sitting awkwardly, but Robert's reaction was far deeper than that. "Where did you get that necklace?" he asked, his voice low but tinged with emotion. Caught off guard, Samantha hesitated. "Oh, this? It belongs to my mom, my adoptive mother, Linda. She kept it in an old jewelry box. I thought it was beautiful, so I decided to wear it today. Is there something wrong with it?" Robert leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, his eyes never leaving the pendant. His face was a blend of disbelief and something darker, grief, maybe. "That necklace," he said quietly, "belonged to my daughter, Emily. I gave it to her on her 18th birthday. She vanished 21 years ago, and we never heard from her again." A chill ran down Samantha's spine. The odds of such a coincidence seemed impossible. Robert's questions came rapidly after that, about her past, her adoption, her mother. Samantha answered as best as she could, though confusion and unease were beginning to weigh on her. She explained how Linda had adopted her as a baby and that she'd never known her biological parents. She'd always accepted the story that her birth mother couldn't raise her due to health issues. Robert absorbed her words in silence, his gaze distant yet fixed on her, as though he was piecing together a puzzle only he could see. Finally, he stood, walking over to the window, lost in thought. "Samantha," he said, turning back to her, his voice softer but filled with intensity, "I need your help. I have to understand how that necklace ended up with your adoptive mother. This can't just be a coincidence." The interview ended abruptly after that, with Robert asking her to keep the necklace, and everything they'd discussed, to herself until he could investigate further. As Samantha stepped out of the building, the crisp city air hit her, but it did nothing to clear the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. What should have been a simple job interview had unraveled into something far more complex, a mystery tied not just to the necklace, but to her very identity. And deep down, she knew that her life had just changed forever. The world outside felt distant and unfamiliar as Samantha left the towering office building of Bennett & Company. Her mind replayed Robert Bennett's words like a broken record. "That necklace belonged to my daughter, Emily." The necklace, once just a pretty piece of jewelry, now felt heavy around her neck, as if it carried the weight of a story she'd never been told. By the time she arrived home, her heart was pounding with a mixture of dread and determination. She needed answers. The cozy little apartment she shared with Linda felt different now, almost like the walls were hiding secrets. Linda was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a magazine, a cup of tea cooling beside her. She looked up with a warm smile as Samantha walked in, but that smile faded when Samantha spoke. "Mom, we need to talk," Samantha said, her voice firmer than usual. She tugged at the necklace absent-mindedly, drawing Linda's attention straight to it. Linda's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "About what, sweetheart?" "This necklace," Samantha replied. "I wore it to my interview today. My potential employer recognized it. He said it belonged to his daughter, Emily Bennett. She disappeared over 20 years ago. He was certain it's the same necklace." Linda's hands stilled on the magazine. For a brief moment, her face was unreadable. Then she forced a casual shrug, her fingers curling tightly around her teacup. "That can't be right," Linda said lightly, avoiding Samantha's eyes. "There are plenty of necklaces like that out there. It's probably just a coincidence." But Samantha wasn't buying it. There was a tremor in Linda's voice, a hesitation she'd never heard before. Her adoptive mother was a woman who could hold her ground in any situation, but not this time. Something was off. Samantha leaned in, her voice soft but insistent. "It didn't feel like a coincidence, Mom. Robert Bennett? He was shaken. Like he'd seen a ghost. Why would he react that way unless he was absolutely sure?" Linda's fingers tightened around her cup, her knuckles white. She stared down at the tea as if it held answers, then gave a dismissive wave. "Samantha, you're overthinking this. It's just a necklace. Don't let it distract you from what's important, your career." But Samantha couldn't let it go. She saw it now, how Linda's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, how she quickly shifted the conversation to something mundane. For the first time in her life, Samantha felt a crack in the foundation of trust she'd always had in Linda. And that scared her more than anything. That night, sleep was impossible. Samantha lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the necklace resting on her nightstand like a silent witness to a story untold. Questions swirled in her mind. Who was Emily Bennett? Could she somehow be connected to her own past? And why was Linda so evasive? Meanwhile, miles away, Robert Bennett couldn't shake the image of Samantha, or more specifically, the necklace around her neck. The resemblance between Samantha and Emily haunted him, and the possibility that Samantha might be his granddaughter gnawed at him. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to waste any time finding them. The next morning, Robert made a call to Daniel Shaw, a private investigator known for digging up truths others wanted buried. Robert didn't just want to know about the necklace. He needed to uncover everything about Samantha, her adoption, and Linda's past. Daniel was meticulous, the kind of man who didn't overlook details. He dove into Linda's background, starting with Samantha's adoption records. It didn't take long for red flags to pop up. The paperwork was vague, riddled with gaps and inconsistencies. The adoption had been handled privately, with minimal documentation, highly unusual for legitimate cases. The deeper Daniel dug, the more suspicious Linda's story became. There was no clear record of Samantha's biological parents, just vague mentions and a trail that seemed deliberately obscured. Then Daniel found something interesting: David Cross, an ex-boyfriend from Linda's past. A man with a checkered history, known for his volatile temper and shady connections. Recently, David had been trying to contact Linda again, leaving cryptic messages and pushing for meetings. There was a link here, something deeper than an old flame. Daniel could feel it. Back at home, Samantha couldn't ignore Linda's strange behavior. Her adoptive mother grew distant, avoiding eye contact, becoming jumpy and anxious whenever Samantha brought up the necklace. It was as if the truth was suffocating her from the inside out. And Samantha was determined to uncover it, no matter how painful it might be. The days that followed felt heavy, thick with unspoken words and glances that lingered just a second too long. Samantha could feel the tension in the apartment like a shadow creeping into every corner. Linda wasn't herself. She avoided eye contact, her once warm, easy conversations now cold and clipped. The woman who had raised her with love and care was suddenly a stranger hiding behind forced smiles and unfinished sentences. Samantha's mind raced. The job interview, the necklace, Robert Bennett's reaction, it all felt like the start of something much bigger. She knew Linda was keeping something from her, and the more Linda dodged her questions, the more determined Samantha became to find the truth. One evening, as Samantha was brushing her teeth, she heard Linda's voice from down the hall. Soft, hushed, too quiet for a casual call. Samantha's curiosity spiked. She turned off the faucet and crept toward Linda's bedroom, careful not to make a sound. The door was slightly ajar, and through the sliver of space, Samantha could see Linda sitting on the edge of her bed, clutching her phone tightly. Her voice was a whisper, but the urgency was unmistakable. "David, this can't go on. They're getting too close. I told you it was risky. You promised this would never come out." David. The name from Daniel's investigation. Samantha's heart raced. She pressed herself against the wall, her pulse pounding in her ears. What did Linda mean by too close? Too close to what? Linda continued, her voice trembling now. "If they find out everything, we're done. I can't lose her, David. I can't." Samantha backed away, her mind spinning. She knew now, Linda was hiding something far bigger than she'd ever imagined. The woman who had been her rock, her family, was tangled in a web of secrets, and David was somehow at the center of it all. The next morning, Samantha confronted Linda, unable to hold back any longer. "Who's David?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. Linda flinched, her spoon pausing mid-air over her cereal. She set it down slowly, her expression guarded. "Just someone from my past." "Why? I heard you on the phone last night. You said I was getting too close." "Too close to what, Mom?" Linda's face paled. For a moment, she looked like she might break down, but then she straightened her shoulders, forcing composure. "You're imagining things, Sam. You've been stressed with the interview." "Don't," Samantha cut in, her voice firm. "Don't lie to me. I'm not a kid anymore. I deserve to know the truth." Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her purse and left the apartment without another word, leaving Samantha alone with her thoughts, and the growing sense that everything she knew about her life was built on a lie. Meanwhile, Daniel's investigation was uncovering more disturbing details. Linda's adoption of Samantha didn't just have gaps, it was practically a black hole. The paperwork was filled with inconsistencies, and key documents were either missing or suspiciously vague. It was as if someone had deliberately erased parts of Samantha's past. But the real breakthrough came when Daniel tracked down David Cross. David was living off the grid, holed up in a rundown cabin outside the city. His reputation preceded him, a man with a history of violence and connections to shady dealings. But what stood out most was his recent activity. He'd been trying to reach Linda with increasing desperation, his messages growing more frantic. Daniel observed from a distance, watching David's patterns, his routines, or lack thereof. The man was jumpy, paranoid, always looking over his shoulder. There was something dark simmering beneath the surface, and Daniel knew it was tied to Samantha's past. Back at the apartment, Samantha's frustration boiled over. She couldn't sit and wait for answers anymore. She needed to confront Linda, truly confront her, no matter how painful the truth might be. That night, when Linda finally returned home, Samantha was waiting. "I know you're hiding something," Samantha said quietly. "And I'm not leaving this room until you tell me what it is." Linda stood in the doorway, her face shadowed by the dim light. She looked tired, older somehow, as if the weight of her secrets had aged her. "You don't want to know, Sam," Linda whispered, her voice brittle. "Yes, I do." Linda sank into a chair, her hands trembling slightly as she rubbed her temples. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a deep, shaky breath, she began. "There are things I did, things I thought I could bury," Linda murmured, her eyes distant. "But the past has a way of catching up." Samantha's heart thudded painfully. "What things?" Linda looked up, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "It's about your mother. Your real mother." The words hit Samantha like a punch to the chest. Linda continued, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Her name was Emily." Samantha's world tilted. Emily Bennett. The name echoed in her mind, unraveling the fragile reality she'd always believed in. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The words hung in the air like a ghost Samantha couldn't escape. Her name was Emily. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, each second amplifying the pounding of Samantha's heart. She sat frozen, trying to process what Linda had just confessed. The woman she had called Mom her entire life had been hiding the truth about her real mother, Emily Bennett, the very woman Robert Bennett had spoken about with such grief and conviction. Samantha swallowed hard. What do you mean? Emily? You told me my biological mother couldn't take care of me because of health issues. You said? I know what I said, Linda interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. She ran her hands through her hair, a gesture Samantha recognized from her childhood, whenever Linda was overwhelmed. But this wasn't about paying bills or a bad day at work. This was something far darker. Linda finally met Samantha's gaze. Her eyes, once so full of warmth, were clouded with guilt and fear. I didn't lie to hurt you. I thought it was for the best. For the best. Samantha's voice rose, a mixture of anger and disbelief. You stole me from my mother, didn't you? Linda flinched as if the words were a slap. She didn't answer right away, and that silence told Samantha everything she needed to know. Tears welled up in Samantha's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. She needed answers. Tell me the truth. All of it. No. Linda took a shuddering breath and began. I met Emily when we were young. She was everything I wasn't, bright, beautiful, full of life. People gravitated toward her without her even trying. We were friends, at least that's what I told myself. But deep down I was always jealous of her. She had everything, looks, charm, and later, Matthew. Matthew? Samantha asked, her mind racing to connect the dots. Matthew Bennett, Linda whispered. Emily's fiancé. Robert's son. And David's twin brother. The mention of David's name sent a cold shiver down Samantha's spine. David, the man Linda had whispered to on the phone. The man Daniel was investigating. Linda's story spilled out like a dam had broken. She spoke of her complicated past with David, a toxic relationship fueled by jealousy, resentment, and obsession. David had always lived in Matthew's shadow, never able to compete with his brother's success, charm, or the fact that Emily had chosen Matthew over him. When Emily found out she was pregnant with Matthew's child, their happiness was short-lived. Matthew died in a tragic car accident shortly after the news, leaving Emily shattered and vulnerable. That's when David saw his chance, Linda continued, her voice barely above a whisper. He was obsessed with her. He thought if Matthew was gone, he could finally have her. But Emily didn't want him, she never did. She was grieving, fragile, but she still didn't love him. And that drove David crazy. Samantha's heart pounded. She could feel the darkness creeping into Linda's words, the truth she'd been dreading. David convinced me, Linda's voice broke, tears streaming down her face now. Convinced me that Emily wasn't fit to be a mother. That she was too broken, too lost after Matthew's death. We told ourselves, we were saving the baby. But it was a lie. We weren't saving anyone. Samantha felt like she couldn't breathe. What did you do? Linda buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. We took her. We kidnapped Emily. Held her somewhere no one could find her. I thought, if I raised the baby, it would be better for everyone. Emily was falling apart, David was obsessed, and I just wanted to feel important. Like I mattered. Samantha stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. You stole me from her. You let her suffer all these years, thinking her baby was gone. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Linda cried. I raised you with love, Samantha. You were my whole world. I tried to give you the best life I could, but it wasn't yours to give, Samantha snapped, her voice trembling with rage. She turned and stormed out of the apartment, the door slamming behind her. The cool night air hit her like a slap, but it didn't clear her head. She felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. Every memory, every moment of her life, now felt like part of a lie. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Daniel. She answered, her voice shaky. What? I've found him, Daniel said without preamble. David Cross. And you need to hear what he has to say. Samantha hesitated, staring out into the dark street, her mind racing. She didn't want to hear more. She didn't want to believe any of this was real. But the truth was already unraveling, and there was no stopping it now. Samantha's grip on the steering wheel was tight, her knuckles white as she drove through the dimly lit streets. The city lights blurred past, but her mind was sharp, razor sharp with anger, confusion, and fear. Daniel had found David Cross, the man whose name had haunted her since the first crack appeared in the life she thought she knew. She arrived at an old, run-down motel on the outskirts of the city. The neon sign flickered like it was gasping for life, casting eerie red glows on the cracked pavement. Daniel was waiting outside, leaning against his car with his arms crossed, his sharp eyes filled with something that looked like both triumph and concern. "He's inside," Daniel said, nodding toward one of the rooms. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Samantha didn't hesitate. "I have to." Daniel gave her a brief nod, then led the way. The door creaked as it opened, revealing David Cross sitting on the edge of a worn-out bed, a cigarette dangling from his fingers. He looked older than Samantha expected, his face rugged and lined with years of bitterness and bad decisions. But his eyes were sharp, cold, and calculating. David looked up, his gaze landing on Samantha. A slow, twisted smile curled on his lips. "You must be Samantha?" She didn't respond. She just stared at him, trying to find any resemblance, any connection to herself, but there was nothing. Just a void. Daniel broke the tension. "We need answers. All of them." David exhaled a cloud of smoke, his smile fading. "Ah, the truth. Funny how people only want it when it's too late." Samantha clenched her fists, fighting the urge to scream. "Just tell me. But why did you take me from my mother?" David's eyes darkened, the amusement gone. "Because Emily didn't deserve you?" The words hit Samantha like a slap. "You didn't even know me." "I knew enough," David snapped, his voice low and bitter. "Emily was fragile. Broken. After Matthew died, she was a wreck, couldn't even get out of bed. She didn't deserve to raise his child, not after she chose him over me." It was like a twisted confession, soaked in resentment. David's obsession with Emily had festered for years, and losing her to his brother Matthew had been the final blow. When Matthew died, David saw his chance, not to love Emily, but to control her, to punish her for not choosing him. "I thought if I took her baby, she'd finally see me. Need me," David continued, his voice softer now, almost reflective. "But she never did. Even when we had her locked away, even when she was at her weakest, she still didn't see me." Samantha's stomach turned. "You're a monster." David's laugh was hollow. "No, sweetheart. I'm just a man who didn't get what he wanted." Daniel stepped forward, his voice sharp. "What happened to Emily after you took Samantha?" David's face hardened. "She broke. Mentally. She stopped fighting, stopped caring. Eventually, she escaped. But by then, she was lost. Broken beyond repair." Samantha's chest felt tight, as if the weight of David's words was crushing her. Her mother had been out there, suffering, while she lived a life built on stolen memories. "Where is she now?" she whispered. David shrugged. "Dead for all I know. Or worse, alive, but not really living." Samantha couldn't take it anymore. She turned and stormed out of the room, her vision blurred with tears. The cool night air hit her face, but it didn't soothe the fire burning inside her. Daniel followed her out, his expression softening. "We'll find her, Samantha. I promise." Samantha shook her head, her voice trembling. "What if it's too late? What if I've already lost her?" Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's not too late. We'll find her." Over the next few days, Daniel worked tirelessly, following leads that connected David and Linda's past to Emily's last known whereabouts. The trail was cold, too many years had passed, too many lies had been layered over the truth. But Daniel was relentless. And then, finally, a breakthrough. A woman matching Emily's description had been seen living on the streets in a nearby city, lost, disoriented, and barely surviving. Daniel and Samantha wasted no time. They drove for hours, the silence in the car heavy with anticipation and fear. When they arrived, Samantha's heart felt like it might burst. They found her in a small park, sitting on a bench, surrounded by worn-out bags and tattered clothes. Her hair was unkempt, her face gaunt, but there was something familiar in her features, something that made Samantha's breath catch in her throat. "Emily?" Daniel approached gently. The woman looked up, her eyes hollow, filled with a fog of forgotten memories. But when she saw Samantha, something flickered, just for a moment. Samantha stepped closer, tears streaming down her face. "Mom?" Emily's eyes locked on hers. No recognition. Just confusion. Samantha fell to her knees beside her, clutching Emily's fragile hands. "I'm your daughter." "Samantha?" Emily stared, her lips trembling. Then, a single tear rolled down her cheek. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. The small park seemed frozen in time as Samantha knelt beside her mother, Emily, clutching her frail hands like they were the last thread holding her together. The woman who had given her life was sitting right there, but her eyes, once vibrant and full of life in the old photos Daniel had found, were now distant, clouded with pain and years lost to darkness. Samantha's voice trembled as she whispered, "It's me. It's Samantha. I'm your daughter." Emily's lips quivered slightly, but there was no recognition, only a shadow of something, an echo of a life long buried under layers of trauma. Samantha's heart broke in ways she didn't know were possible. The woman she had dreamed of meeting, the mother she had wondered about her entire life, was here, but lost. Daniel gently placed a hand on Samantha's shoulder. "She might not remember now, but there's still hope." They took Emily to a specialized trauma recovery clinic. The doctors were cautious but optimistic. Emily was diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, along with other mental health conditions resulting from years of psychological abuse and neglect. It wouldn't be an easy road, but for the first time in years, Emily was safe. Samantha visited her mother every day. She sat by her bedside, talked about her life, her childhood, her favorite books, anything to spark a memory, a connection. At first, Emily was unresponsive, trapped in the fog of her mind. But slowly, small changes began to appear. A flicker of recognition, a tear rolling down her cheek when Samantha mentioned Linda's name, a faint squeeze of her hand when Samantha spoke about Matthew. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across Emily's hospital room, something shifted. Samantha was showing Emily the necklace, the same amethyst pendant that had started this entire journey. "This belonged to you," Samantha whispered, her fingers tracing the delicate chain. "Robert gave it to you on your 18th birthday. You wore it every day, until you couldn't anymore." Emily's gaze fixed on the necklace. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, brushing against the pendant. Then, softly, so softly that Samantha almost missed it, Emily whispered, "Matthew?" Samantha's breath hitched. "Yes." "Matthew was your fiancé." "My father." Tears filled Emily's eyes, and this time, she didn't look through Samantha, she looked at her. Recognition flickered like a fragile flame in the dark. "My baby?" Emily's voice cracked, barely audible. Samantha couldn't hold back her tears. She leaned forward, wrapping her arms around her mother, feeling Emily's weak embrace in return. It wasn't strong, but it was real. "Yes, Mom. I'm your daughter. I found you." Meanwhile, justice was closing in on Linda and David. Armed with confessions, evidence from Daniel's investigation, and David's own bitter admissions, the authorities pressed charges: kidnapping, psychological abuse, illegal adoption, and more. David's trial was quick. His lack of remorse sealed his fate. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Linda's trial was more complicated. She had raised Samantha with love, but the truth of her actions was undeniable. Her defense painted a picture of a woman who believed she was protecting a child, but the court saw the truth: a woman driven by jealousy, obsession, and selfishness. She was sentenced to serve time, though with a lesser sentence than David's due to her cooperation and the absence of physical abuse. Samantha attended both trials. She watched Linda being led away in handcuffs, her face etched with regret. As Linda passed her, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Samantha. I love you." Samantha didn't respond. She didn't know if she could ever forgive Linda, not yet. Maybe not ever. Months passed, and slowly, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Emily's recovery was slow but steady. With therapy and constant support from Samantha and Robert, who had never given up hope of finding his daughter, Emily began to piece together the fragments of her shattered past. One bright spring afternoon, Samantha sat with her mother and Robert in the garden of the clinic. Emily's eyes were clearer now, her spirit flickering back to life. "I missed so much," Emily whispered, tears in her eyes as she looked at Samantha. "Your first steps, your first words. I wasn't there." Samantha squeezed her hand gently. "But you're here now. That's what matters." Robert, his face softened by emotion, reached over and took Emily's other hand. "We can't change the past, but we can create new memories." Samantha smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. The scars would always be there, etched deep into her soul, but they no longer defined her. She had found her mother. She had found her truth. And she had found herself. One day, Samantha visited her mother with a small gift, a box wrapped in simple paper. Emily opened it carefully, revealing the amethyst necklace, polished and gleaming under the sunlight. "This belongs to you," Samantha said softly, tears in her eyes. It always did. Emily's hands trembled as she lifted the necklace, her eyes glistening with tears. She fastened it around her neck, her fingers lingering on the pendant. "It's more than just a necklace," Emily whispered. "It's proof that love can survive even the darkest of times." Samantha nodded, her heart full. "And that family isn't just about who raises you. It's about who's willing to fight to find you." The three of them, Samantha, Emily, and Robert, sat together, the past woven into the present, the pain stitched with hope. They weren't a perfect family. They never would be. But they were a family. And that was enough. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. Your interest and support inspire us to bring you more captivating tales filled with emotions, twists, and the complexity of life, love, betrayal, and redemption. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. We value your voice and want to hear what you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new story, and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Thank you for bringing this channel to life with your views and encouragement. See you in the next story.